opinions expressed by guests on this podcast do not represent or reflect the official policy or position of the Take a Paycheck Foundation and podcast. All information shared is from personal experiences and does not constitute medical advice. We do not take responsibility for any statements expressed during the podcast. Take a Paycheck does not endorse any products or services. Any said products or services mentioned on this podcast may not be suitable for you or your condition. Please consult with your physician if you have medical questions, as it may pertain to your condition.
Hey everyone, welcome back to this week's episode on Take a Paycheck. Today I have the honor to talk to Charlotte. So hi Charlotte, can you start off by giving me a brief introduction about yourself, telling me a little bit about your education, your job if you have one, your hobbies, and your diagnosis?
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks so much for having me, Natasha. You're doing such a great job on Take a Paycheck. So thanks for having me. I'm Charlotte and I'm living in Calgary, Alberta. I've been here for a little over 2 years now, but I grew up in Kingston, Ontario, and I spent time in Halifax as well when I was doing my undergrad at Dalhousie. My undergrad was in biology. I knew at the time I wanted to do science and kind of nixed physics and chemistry. So that left biology, which I did really enjoy. And then after my undergrad at Dal, I went to the University of Alberta in Edmonton and I did a Master's of Science in Epidemiology. So that's what I graduated with a couple of years ago. And now, for the last couple of months, I've been working for the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, CIHR, which is Canada's biggest health research funder. So it's money that the government takes and puts into health research. And my job there is working on the knowledge mobilization team. So we're working on policies that hopefully take evidence from the research that CIHR funds and puts it into practice. So we're really trying to increase the uptake of evidence-based practices, both in policy and practically and in clinics as well.
That's so interesting. It's great to hear that you're kind of really busy in a way. You also traveled all over Canada, I feel from Ontario. That's a lot, but you got through and now you're you're figuring your life out, which is nice to hear. So you have a job, but what are you diagnosed with?
Oh, thank you. I have rheumatoid arthritis. So I was diagnosed about 4.5 years ago. It was in the first few months of my master's program in Edmonton. So that was not the best time. I mean, there's never a good time to be diagnosed with a chronic illness, but it definitely wasn't a good time. And yeah, I've been living with rheumatoid arthritis now since then and figuring out how to do that along the way.
Was this something that you expected, to get this diagnosis?
So it was a bit of a process. I feel like my earliest symptoms were maybe a year or even a little bit before I finally got a diagnosis. And I think compared to a lot of people, my diagnostic process was actually really simple. I didn't go through the missteps of having misdiagnoses or having doctors that didn't believe me. It was more my own stubbornness and denial that lengthened my diagnosis and the time from having symptoms to actually getting a diagnosis of arthritis. So at first it was just waking up the odd morning and having really swollen fingers, usually just one at a time, and swollen to the point where I couldn't really move them, and thinking that I was I don't know, thinking that I wasn't experiencing what I actually was. And I remember going to my housemates at the time and being my fingers are swollen, right? I'm not just making this up, they're hot and they're swollen. And they'd be yeah. And at one point I did go to a clinic on campus at Dalhousie, and the doctor there, she sent me for blood work and it was fine. And she was oh, maybe it's chilblains, because it was kind of cold. And then just infrequently over the next 6 months or something, kind of that would keep happening. And then eventually my symptoms really started to ramp up in the summer before I started my master's. So summer 2017, I was working at a garden center and in a landscaping job. So it was very physical. And I was working sometimes 12 hours a day, biking to and from work and working 7 days a week. So I was having swelling and pain, but I was chalking it up to just the physicality of my job. And so once again denying myself like what I was experiencing. But I would be like getting ready to get on my bike in the morning, and like I couldn't walk down the stairs, or like my feet were so swollen I like couldn't get them into my running shoes. And looking back now, it's silly of me to have thought that was normal, but that's just the mindset I was in, that it was just because of the nature of my work and it was going to pass, and I had to go to grad school, and like I couldn't run into any new problems in the next couple months before I got there. So I just put it into the back of my mind and pretended it wasn't a problem. And then, went to grad school, and it would still kind of happen every once in a while. And I remember like a lot of my memories around this time are associated with school, just because like that's what I was focusing on at the time. And I would have biostatistics classes at 8:30 in the morning, which people with rheumatoid arthritis know that like mornings are usually our bad time. So I remember like, in some cases skipping my 8:30 classes to go to the gym and just like try to get my body moving, because I had figured out that like relieved some of my symptoms, and my what I didn't know at the time was morning stiffness. And or like going to class and like not really being able to hold my pencil because my fingers were so swollen. And like with statistics, you have to be writing like formulas down and stuff. It's not computer work typically. So that was a problem also at 8:30 in the morning. So I think after, a couple of times of having to skip classes because of the way I felt, a couple of months later, I was like, okay, I have to go deal with this. Like obviously something's wrong with me. And that's when I finally took myself to see a doctor on campus, and she like immediately knew what it was. Like before I even had any blood work done, like, I don't know if she had some past experience with someone in her life that had a similar thing going on, but she just like took a couple looks at me and heard my story and said, okay, I think you probably need to be referred to a rheumatologist, sent me for blood work. I did it that day. And then the very next day, I was back in the doctor's office with my results from that blood work, and my inflammation was just off the charts.
You said that you didn't have any misdiagnosis or anything like that, but it did take a long time for you to kind of come to the point where you were like, let me see a doctor.
Yeah, it was all me. It was my own. I made my own problems.
It's probably really common to feel that way. And I don't think it's just you, but it's just interesting that it was more so the time it took you to get to the doctor rather than like you going to multiple doctors to figure out what was happening, which is really interesting because I haven't heard someone say that they were in like so much denial for like over like 6 months.
More like a year probably, but
Wow.
I know. And I maybe wasn't talking enough to people in my life about what I was going through too. Like I think my mom knew for sure. I was talking to her about it, and she was gently nudging me to go seek care, but also she was across the country and not in a position to force me to go to the doctor.
Yeah, was that hard because you were away from your family and you were in a new place?
Yeah, for sure. Like I didn't know a single person when I moved to Edmonton. And so I was fortunate to land in like a house where I made some really good friends out of my roommates, and they were compassionate and somewhat motherly. So I was like lucky to have them, and they definitely joined me on the experience. But after going to the doctor in the experience that I just described, and then a couple of weeks later, finally being in the rheumatologist's office and like getting my proper diagnosis, like it was really lonely for sure. There was no one there like really to support me immediately after my diagnosis. And it was coming off of exam season too. I finished my last exam of the semester and then went to my appointment to get diagnosed with this like life-changing condition. And it was really emotional. Like I fully bawled in the doctor's office, and I was flying home for Christmas the next day. And so the nurse came in and was like, hey, I have to teach you right now, like how to do a self-injection, because like you're going home for the holidays and like we need to start you on your medications right away. So she was very sweet to stay after hours to like try to teach me how to do the injection. But I just like wasn't having any of it because I was so emotional that, she was trying to teach me through, and I was just crying through the whole lesson.
I totally understand. It must have been a lot, especially because you got this diagnosis and now it's like all of a sudden you have to learn how to navigate your diagnosis. It's like you have to, it's like go, go, go. And you don't have the support. I mean, the direct support of your family with you all the time. Whereas, yes, they might be a phone call away, but you know, you have to get your own medication now. You have to do all of this stuff. And I can't imagine what life is like in that sense. Cause I've had my parents like order my medication, take me to the doctor, like my life, because I was diagnosed at 13. So it's kind of, I was always with my parents.
Yeah.
And so for you, like getting this diagnosis when you're not with your parents, that must have been a little bit tough.
Yeah. And also just like I said, not really having like anyone that I was super close to around. Of course, those connections formed over the time that I was in Edmonton and navigating the earlier parts of my diagnosis, but I was 3 months into being in a new city. So you can only form connections that are so deep. Fortunately, I did go home for Christmas like immediately after my diagnosis. So in that sense, I had support of my parents and my close friends from home. And that was nice because I was definitely an emotional wreck at that time. Like just I would I would cry at the drop of a hat like over that Christmas because everything seemed so serious like after having received my diagnosis. So I'm happy that I was home at least for a couple weeks, but going back was hard like after the break and having to start a new semester.
Yeah, it's navigating school and a chronic illness, which I see is pretty difficult. But we were talking a little bit about, you were saying how your fingers were swollen, you were doing stats and all that. So from what I've heard, your hands and your feet are impacted with arthritis. Is there any other joint that's affected?
Not so much now, like it typically is now just my hands and feet, but yeah, at the time of my diagnosis, it was one of my elbows was like really swollen to the point of like not being able to straighten it, shoulders, my neck, and like I'm pretty sure my jaw as well. Like a lot of things were starting to be affected. And those like last kind of joints that I mentioned, those kind of resolved themselves like once I started going on medication. The swelling in my elbow never really went down until I got like a cortisone shot in it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, definitely pretty much my whole body was affected like at the time of my diagnosis. Yeah. And
it clearly moves around. So it's not the same place anymore. And you said hands and feet, same here. So that's, yeah. And you are doing science and I'm actually doing science as well. So I'm just curious to know, how did you navigate science courses with swollen hands?
Oh man. Well, like I said, I skipped a lot of my biostats courses. And so, that isn't very conducive to doing well in school. But, it seemed like at the time, the only thing I could do was to try to go and relieve my symptoms. I wasn't going to like be in class writing like this with my hands closed in a weird way over my pencil. So yeah, I don't know. Fortunately, it was just the one class. And otherwise it was a lot of computer work, which is a little easier when your hands are not so mobile. But yeah, certainly I can appreciate, especially with some of the first and second year science courses, like there's so much writing that you have to do, or like, drawing molecules if you're in chemistry or whatever. That could definitely be really hard.
So you didn't do any chem classes?
Not in my master's.
Oh, but then you only got rheumatoid arthritis.
Yeah, I made it through those first and second year science courses pretty unscathed because I wasn't having any problems at that point.
Oh, that's so nice.
Like I feel for you.
Yeah, like it's definitely such a big challenge because, like you mentioned, drawing those organic chemistry, like molecules, the reactions and all that. And I do have accommodations, but I don't know if this is just like me, but I feel like if my hands were better in a sense, or like hurt less, like I feel like I would be able to do so much better in school. And a lot of people like take that as, oh, you're so lucky, like you don't really have to like write and whatever. I feel like I'm a little bit different in the sense that I wish that I was able to do all of my homework and complete all of the questions. But because I'm in pain, it's like selectively picking one and then praying for the best on the test.
Yeah, for sure. It's so hard to focus on what you're learning and what you're supposed to be writing down if you're in pain. Like you can't ignore the fact that your hand hurts every time you make a motion like on your paper. And so, I think it's maybe a little naive for other people to think that you have it easier because you have accommodations. Like, of course, everyone would rather be in control and taking their own notes and, making the most of their education experience that they're putting so much time and effort into.
Yeah, I think I just didn't realize how much writing meant to me, in a sense that like having the ability to write and not be in pain. Like I think everyone doesn't think like so hard about it, or like it's like, oh yeah, like I write like my homework, I do, like I draw on my free time. But if once that's like taken away from you, it's like your life has completely changed. And it was really hard for me because I was diagnosed in grade 8, so it was like a really weird time. It's like ending elementary school and you're going to high school, so you've learned how to write all of your life, and now it's like, oh, by the way, it's gonna hurt now and you can't do it as much.
No, absolutely. And like so much of having a chronic illness is like coping with a loss of control and like being able to make those decisions for yourself that you want to, like, just having the ability to write. People don't appreciate it, but it is a privilege, and like it's something we take for granted when we don't have any sort of mobility challenges or things like that.
Yeah, for sure, 100%. So we talked a little bit about you being far away from home, but when you did get that diagnosis, I'm assuming you called your family on the phone. How did they react?
I think like they were kind of primed by the time I actually got to the rheumatologist's office, because I had received somewhat of a confident diagnosis from the GP, like the general practitioner that I saw on campus. And so, by the time I got the official diagnosis from the rheumatologist, I think we all kind of knew that that's what it was. But I think it was really hard on my parents to also be away from me and to not be able to support me maybe in the way that they wanted to. So it was just a challenge for all of us. And I definitely got love bombed. Like when I went home for Christmas, they were, definitely wanting to support me and make sure that I was feeling comfortable. So that was nice of them.
Do you have any siblings?
I have a brother and a stepbrother and a stepsister.
And so how did that go? Like letting them know?
I think for my brother, he is like a very empathetic person. So, I think he did probably struggle a little bit, like knowing that I was in pain and going through something that he like couldn't really help with, and just kind of supported me in the way that brothers do, which is just like making it known that they're there if I need something, but not being too overbearing. My stepsister is a nurse. And so I think she also kind of understood like more immediately and more innately, like what I had just been diagnosed with. So that's nice too. When you have people in your life that understand when you say the words rheumatoid arthritis, that, what that means and what that entails, and that you don't have to explain it to. So I'm lucky to have her in that situation too.
Yeah, it's nice to see that you had a well-balanced family support life in a way. Like everyone was supportive, your housemates were supportive.
I was and am also in the position where like if I needed to just like drop everything and move home, like I was in a position where I could do that. Like my parents would be able to support me. And so that's like a privilege that I have as well, that I knew if it got too tough, like I could just stop and I would have people who could look after me, whereas a lot of people, unfortunately, aren't in that same position. So although we were all spread out, I, was still lucky to be in the situation that I was in terms of my community support, as you say.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you bring that up, because same, I feel like my parents would do the same thing, and they're always like, oh, like you don't have to do science, like if it hurts your joints or like whatever, like don't worry, like we have like a plan for you, like you're gonna be okay, you can just like be at home for a while. And then like my dad has a company, so I can just work under him or whatever, and I'm just like, yeah, like well, I'll think about it in the future, that'll be my backup plan. But for me specifically, I feel like I need to achieve what I want to achieve, or like try at least, rather than me just going to the backup plan already.
Yeah, I agree. And I think as much as I implicitly knew I had a soft landing if I wanted it, it wasn't really something that occurred to me or that I took very seriously. Like I was more inclined to just go back to school and like suffer through the experience, or, find my way through that early time of my diagnosis while also in grad school, than leave that dream and that pursuit behind.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's like a part of our personalities or something, but it's interesting because there are some people that would do that, but there's some people that wouldn't. And it's interesting to just like talk to other people and like hear their perspectives, especially because I know that I would want, I'm a very high achiever, and I feel like you are too, from what it sounds like. And so like even getting the smallest like B's on like tests, like that would be really hard for me to see. But yeah,
Yeah.
and then like recently, actually getting to university, I was like, for some reason, like it took me a really long time to be like, if you don't get like the best mark ever, it's not the end of the world. Because I remember like after my orgochem exam last year, I was crying. Like my teacher was so nice and he accommodated me, but I was just, I don't know. The course in general is so hard because it's all drawing, and I had those accommodations, but I felt like if I was able to write so much more and practice so much more, I would have been able to do better. And I cried after that. And my mom was like, honestly, like as long as you pass, it's not the end of the world. And I'm like, okay, fine. But I was so upset because I felt like I could do better. I don't know if you've experienced something like that before.
Yes, absolutely. I've had my own journey in this space. Immediately, like so second semester, like immediately after being diagnosed, I was definitely at a low place, like mentally and emotionally, just still processing my new diagnosis and how it was going to change my life and the unknown implications of having arthritis, like for my future. And I became like really apathetic towards school. I think I went through something that maybe a lot of people do in their life, which is you get to the point where you realize that like your health and like the health of your loved ones is like absolutely the most important thing in your life, and nothing else really matters. And to me at the time, that also included school. And so I like got to a place mentally where I just like wasn't really interested in putting myself or putting effort like into classes and into school, which isn't great. Like if you're trying to get through your program on time and keep marks up for scholarships and stuff like that. So midterms of that year, like in March or something, I remember having midterms that I just didn't study for, or like maybe studied 2 hours, which is something that I never ever would have thought about or allowed myself to do prior to my diagnosis. And for some reason, like that flip had just been switched in my brain, and I decided that it wasn't important to study. And so I just like went into those midterms more or less unprepared. And I definitely had to like crawl out of that apathetic state. And like, I think that happened as my medications like started to kick in and the initial shock of my diagnosis kind of wore off. Like I was able to get back to a place where I could put effort and focus and time into school. But yeah, like, and I still don't think I've like fully gone back to my initial state pre-diagnosis of like high achieving, really disciplined, and like able to focus for long periods of time, because I think part of coping with my diagnosis too was allowing myself a little more leniency in terms of like if I didn't get something done, like not making myself feel bad about it. So I'm still finding the balance between like being disciplined and setting goals and trying to achieve them, but also putting less pressure on myself so that I can focus on my health, like first and foremost. And I took an extra year to finish my master's, which is not something that I planned to do at the outset. Like I said, I like to finish things on time and do them as they're supposed to be done. But my diagnosis, in addition to some other choices I made in terms of like picking up different jobs that were good for my resume and volunteering and just a few, like a combination of things just kind of slowed me down a bit. But certainly my diagnosis was a big part of that, because I like had to prioritize my health. I had to get sleep. I had to make sure I was like exercising. I had to keep my stress down. And I think that, those things did slow me down a bit because I just didn't have the tenacity that I did when I started my program. And I'm okay with that now. Like I'm really happy how that chapter of my life turned out, but it was hard to see some of my classmates graduating before me when I knew it was, somewhat in my control to have maybe finished a little bit earlier. So, that was the journey I took, and I'm comfortable with it now. And like I said, I think it worked out for the best because I had a lot of experiences that built me up professionally in addition to just my academics. But it was hard at the time.
So a while back, you mentioned that you were on medication and that kind of helped you. What medications were you on, or are you on right now?
At the time of my diagnosis, I was put on triple therapy, which I think for me, and I think is typically methotrexate, which was an injection for me, sulfasalazine, and hydroxychloroquine. So two types of pills and an injection, which I did once a week. I think I fared like pretty well on that combination of triple therapy. It definitely worked, and I think I had minimal side effects relative to what a lot of people do. So I'm grateful for that. Maybe a year and a half or 2 years later, I went off of methotrexate, and I think that after not being on it, I realized that it was kind of making me feel crappy. But it wasn't until I stopped that I knew that was the case. Because I don't think I had, like lots of people struggle with the day after they do their injection feeling really crummy, or like, digestive issues on it and stuff like that. And I didn't really have to deal with any of that. But I think that it was making me feel less robust than I could have been. Yeah. And so now I'm just taking hydroxychloroquine and sulfasalazine, which have been working well for the last couple of years.
Wow, I'm on triple therapy too. So it's funny that you bring that up.
Know the life. Yeah.
Triple therapy, fun, I guess. I was on methotrexate and biologics like a few years ago, and every single time I've had methotrexate in my life, which has been 3 times, once solo methotrexate, the second time methotrexate with a biologic, and the third time now triple therapy. The first 2 times, like it didn't work at all. Like I didn't see any relief or anything like that. So I've always had it in the back of my mind, like, is this actually working? Because now I'm on it right now. So it's always like a thought. But methotrexate has caused me some amazing side effects that I love so much. For the longest time, I had a lot of hair falling all over the place, everywhere. Like I would get out of the toilet and it was like, oh, hair's on the floor. Like, how did that come here? And it was just so frustrating.
That happened to me too. And like, I also thought it was a methotrexate, but like my doctors never really thought it was a problem. But I'm like, I'm pretty sure I'm losing more hair than normal. And again, it wasn't until I went off of it that I stopped losing so much hair. And then it was kind of confirmed, like, okay, this is actually what it was.
Yeah. So I decreased my dosage. So like these are a few things that I have with methotrexate. So I actually was on the injection format of it for like a year or so, but then I experienced the hair loss, and then I felt nausea for some reason, like right after it. Like, I don't know, it was just really bad. And so then I was like, okay, my doctor said, let's reduce the dosage and go to like a pill format. So I was like, sure. But then the other thing was that apparently rumors say that the pill format causes like more nausea. I don't know. But when I went to the pill format, the nausea stopped and the hair loss became less because I went to a lower dosage. Like you said, like you kind of tapered down. So then that showed that was what was causing the hair loss. But the thing that came very fun, it's like discoloration. And I experienced it when I was on biologics and methotrexate a few years ago, around my neck, like in the back of my neck. And then I used this like shampoo and it went away. I don't know, my family doctor told me to use like shampoo on it. So I bought it. And then now all of a sudden, like I see it all over my back and I was just like, what is happening? And I feel like so many insecurities come with that. Like, I honestly didn't know it was there till someone in my house was like, oh, like, have you seen your back? And I was like, no, what are you talking about? And then I got stressed out. I was like, why does it look like this? Like, how am I going to fix it? Like, there's just so much like happening. And like, that was all I was thinking about. But yeah, it does have its side effects that they don't tell you about till you get on it and you've experienced it. Then it's like, oh yeah, like that was a side effect. Like, surprise.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if it's a case of like people experiencing it and their doctors dismissing it. So then it's like not really reported properly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like if the doctors say like, oh, this only happens to 5% of people, like 5% of people may experience hair loss. I think the numbers are probably higher. It's just that people maybe don't bother to bring it up. That's kind of my theory because
no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like that makes a lot of sense. So you're on triple therapy. Well, now you've gone to just Plaquenil and sulfasalazine. So, and that's helping you.
Yeah, I had a brief stint on leflunomide as well. I don't know. I'm like at the point in my life where I'm kind of thinking about family planning, like in the next, like, you know, in the not so distant future. And so that's something that you have to taper off of or be off of, I guess, for 2 years, you know, prior to thinking about becoming pregnant. So it was just something I didn't want to have to deal with. So, like last year, I just decided that the leflutamide had to go, and we didn't end up replacing it with anything, and it's been fine.
Okay, family planning, very interesting. So how's that been going? Like, I know you said you just kind of like had to like think about it, but have you talked to your doctor about things like this?
It's like, it's not something I'm trying to do like right now. It's just I didn't want to have to give myself another 2 years after like maybe being ready to have kids. Like I just didn't want the flutamide in my system at all. So now I can feel like I'm in a place where I can make that decision like right at the time when I'm ready. And I don't need to plan for it so far in advance. So it was just something I didn't really want like hanging over me as I enter that phase of my life. And so
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Like you feel much more relieved in a sense, because otherwise you'd be thinking about it. And it's like, should I have kids? Should I not? What should I do?
It just took the pressure off. Like I just made that decision. Now it's like making its way out of my system. And, if I'm ready, like to start a family, like whenever, like I can start to think about that seriously, and I don't need to be waiting.
Yeah. So do you only live with rheumatoid arthritis, or do you have other conditions?
I have celiac disease as well. I was diagnosed in 2001 when I was 7, which was, in a time before it was so mainstream. My dad has it as well, and he was diagnosed in the 80s. So like for a long time, it was just him and me with celiac disease, and no one else had ever heard of it. Mm-hmm. So, I would say there's an aspect on that side of the family of like autoimmune disorders for sure, which I'm sure is tied into my arthritis.
How did that impact you, like being 7 years old and having celiac disease?
Like, okay, because my family was sort of used to it because of my dad. Like we had already had to start making dietary changes for our family meals to accommodate him. So it was good in the sense that it wasn't new to everybody, but it is really socially isolating at any time in your life, but especially as a kid when no one's heard of it. So like, it was hard to not eat cupcakes at birthday parties and like not eat the pizza at like when you're hanging out with your friends, or having kids like very innocently asking you, oh, what happens like if you eat gluten, and like trying to avoid talking about digestive issues, when you're 10 years old.
Yeah. And how did you accommodate yourself?
I mean, like
you just ate it.
Yeah. I mean, my mom like definitely tried to send me with a substitute if I was like going to a birthday party or something. And there were definitely some very kind parents in my friend group who would try to make sure that they had something available for me if I was coming over, which was really nice, but it's also kind of awkward because like even at that age of 10 or whatever, like I didn't really want people to make a fuss for me. And that's still something I deal with to this day. Like people are really kind, having an alternative on hand for me, but I also don't want people to make a fuss. Like that kind of makes me uncomfortable. Yeah. And so I've gone through phases with it. Like from the very beginning, I was kind of resentful that I was being told like what I could and could not eat as a kid. Like a lot of the fun kid foods have gluten in them. And so that chapter of my life, ended pretty quickly. And, as I grew into a young adult, I definitely had times where I tried to pretend that I didn't have it because I just like wanted to eat something that I had never had before. And fortunately, like if I have a little bit of gluten, I'm going to be okay. Whereas that's not the case for a lot of people. But I've definitely like pushed my limits in some cases because I just like wanted to be a young person and not have to restrict myself.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. I also have dietary restrictions, so I totally understand what you're talking about. It is sometimes socially awkward to like explain yourself in a way too, and like you just don't want to go through that multiple times. Over a period of time you get used to it, so it's not as bad anymore.
I wish I knew like what it was like to be diagnosed as an adult, because I think I would handle it a little more gracefully, but I kind of have like triggers a little bit even from the time when I was a kid that like some social situations are just hard because like for so much of my life, I had to say no to things. Like when you're at a restaurant and like a bread basket comes out and everyone's so hungry and everyone's like digging in and like slathering butter on the warm bread. And I just have to sit there and smell it and take it. Like that still really sucks, but I'm not going to tell the people I'm with not to eat the bread. You know?
Yeah, no, I totally understand you. But yeah, no, I remember like usually at restaurants when they bring like big tubs of bread, everyone just goes because they're so hungry and they don't want to wait for the other food. Yeah. So we talked a little bit about your past as a child, but now I wanted to dive in a little bit about the future and if you have any worries in general about the future of living with arthritis.
Yeah, non-specific fears of the unknown. I feel good now. Like I'm at a place in my like with my health that things are pretty stable and I'm able to do all the things that I want to do, but I don't assume that that's going to be the case forever. I hope it will be, but I don't know for sure. So I think it's just like general, fear of the unknown and hoping that you'll be able to accomplish your dreams and like do all the things that you want to do without being held back in any way because of arthritis. As time goes on too, you get to understand yourself and your disease better. And it's not always going to be perfect, but like you just keep collecting little bits of information that can help you and make you feel more confident and make you understand the process you're going through more. So, I hope for both of us that things continue on the right trend.
So I know you because we're both part of the Arthritis Research Canada Patient Advisory Board. Can you explain? I mean, like, I know what that is and I know what your responsibilities are, but can you explain what APAB is, what we do, and how you got involved?
Yeah, the Arthritis Patient Advisory Board, lovingly called APAB, is a group of people with different rheumatic diseases who come together to provide advice and act as patient partners in arthritis-related research. So we're not so much of a patient advocacy group as we are like a patient research group, I guess. And so different researchers from across Canada can come to us and ask for our advice on how they should plan or interpret their research or how they can make it better and more patient oriented. So that's what we do. And, there's a big aspect of outreach and sharing research with the public. So those are kind of the things that we do. I got involved, I guess, about a year into my diagnosis. And I think similar to a lot of people, it was a case of wanting to make something positive out of a bad situation. I was partway through my master's in epidemiology and I had a year of patient experience. And I thought that maybe I would have skills that I could bring to the board based on particularly my research background, but just being at an intersection of having research skills and having a patient and lived experience as well. So that's kind of why I joined. And I'm, still figuring out how I can be the best patient partner or the best person to be on this board. It's like there's definitely skills involved in communicating with researchers and making your lived experience valuable and taking the stories that you've heard from other people with arthritis or rheumatic diseases and incorporating that into like your advocacy on a research team. So it's definitely easier said than done, but I'm doing my best to take what I learned in school and what I'm learning in my professional career and hopefully make arthritis research more accessible and interesting to people with arthritis.
Yeah, I remember when you reached out to me. I just joined like APAB and you were so nice. You were kind of assigned to me to help me out and answer any questions if I had any like questions, because I think I was 18 years old and like that was kind of scary in a way because everyone in the board was like way older than me. So, or like somewhat older than me, if that makes sense. And so I usually for the longest time, I didn't really do anything or I didn't participate because I was afraid. But once I kind of got into the environment and got used to it, I felt like it was so much easier to like talk to everyone and it's so nice to be around other people that live with arthritis. Everyone was so supportive, including you. So I guess thanks for welcoming me.
Yeah, oh, that's very sweet. And it turns out that you didn't really need my help very much. You were, I think,
Yeah.
in part from having this platform that you have, you already had a leg up in the sense that you're used to talking to people about your experience and, being an advocate. And so I think that those were skills that you immediately brought to the team that you didn't have to work on. Whereas that was new to me. I maybe had the research side down pat, but I didn't have as many skills in terms of sharing my story. And it's still hard. Like I'm certainly not the most vocal in the group. So I try to contribute in other ways, but I agree that it's great to have representation from all different ages and backgrounds and types of diseases, because I've talked to a few people where it felt like I was hearing from them was like looking into my future in a way, like they have had a similar experience to me, but they're 20 years older. So I kind of get to look into the future and see what my experience with arthritis might be like. And so I think that's a really interesting part of the community that APAB brings.
Yeah, exactly. At first, it is intimidating for anyone that wants to get involved in any sort of research group or organization. But once you get the hang of it, and I was like really grateful to have someone like you just like ask me like if I needed any help, like I could come to you. I think that's really important. And like getting that support in different kinds of way was really helpful. So yeah, my experience with APAB has been wonderful. So shout out to Arthritis Research.
Shout out APAB. They're lucky to have you.
You too. What advice would you give to those who are working through their graduate studies while dealing with a chronic condition?
The advice I would give to someone in grad school with a chronic condition would just be to go at your own pace and to recognize that you are on a unique journey and you have unique roadblocks to what other people may have, and that it's okay to take time and space to accomplish your goals, that there's no downside to taking a little bit more time if it means that you're happier and healthier through the process, and if it means that you can keep stress down and maybe enjoy yourself a little bit more. So I think that would be my advice, is to not worry if you have to deviate from your timeline a little bit, because in the grand scheme of things, you have a lot of time to make it up on the other side.
Thank you so much, Charlotte, for coming on the podcast today. We talked about your long-awaited diagnosis because of denial, but also what it was like after receiving your diagnosis. So we talked about your whole diagnosis journey. We discussed your mentality towards school and how that changed over time. And then we trailed off to talk about your lifestyle changes and how that has significantly improved your life in general and your quality of life. And then we end off the episode with APAB and Arthritis Research Canada and the amazing work that you are doing while volunteering. So everyone, like, comment, subscribe, check out Charlotte's social media channels, link down below. I will also link Arthritis Research Canada's website down below. And I'll see everyone in 2 weeks on Take a Pain Check. Thank you so much, Charlotte. Bye.
Thanks, Natasha. Take care.
Keeping